Do you remember when Saturday morning was the only time to watch cartoons? Yes, not too long ago, kids would have to wait a whole week for shows like Bugs Bunny, Alvin and the Chipmunks, The Smurfs, My Little Pony, or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to come on TV. Well, since the 1980s and early 90s, we've seen the animation genre expand from Saturday morning and after-school programming to primetime viewing and 24/7 streaming access. Cartoons have grown up with the generations who watch them, and we're taking a look at the cartoon viewing experience of the 80s and 90s compared to today. Watching cartoons in the 80s and 90s. For cartoon fans of a certain generation, the viewing experience wasn't always as convenient as it is now. Kids with iPads are just a few clicks away from a near-endless digital library of kid-specific programming. But in the peak Saturday morning cartoon era of the 1980s and 90s, it took a little more timing and effort. Available only on the big three cable channels or over-the-air broadcasts using rabbit ears, children's programming blocks were limited to times when kids might be at home watching. Thus, Saturday morning was prime cartoon watching time. There was another block where networks would play certain cartoon reruns for a couple of hours after school before the adults were home from work to take over the TV. Outside of those allotted broadcast feeds, the VCR and VHS recording technology became the equivalent of today's on-demand viewing, allowing kids to watch their favorite shows on tape. That's as long as nobody else older than you wanted to use the TV first. The previous decades of the 1960s and 70s saw Saturday morning cartoon TV blocks aimed at kids largely as filler material, replaying animated shorts from the 1940s and 50s that were originally shown in movie theaters, like Popeye the Sailor or Looney Tunes. Original cartoon programming in the late 60s and 70s saw that lineup of classics padded with newer but much cheaper animated content from studios like Hanna-Barbera and Filmation, with cartoon favorites like Scooby-Doo, Super Friends, and Spider-Man. But the 1980s brought a renaissance to every kid's living room TV. Much more imaginative and vivid cartoons took hold in the 1980s, including action-oriented classics like the Transformers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, alongside lighter fare like Jem and the Holograms, the Smurfs, and the Care Bears. Although plenty of criticism was leveled towards these shows that their improved animation was being used simply as a tactic to sell toys related to the shows, plus whatever other junk food and merchandise was advertised alongside it, plenty of Saturday morning options from the 80s and 90s offset this by filling their shows with life lessons that helped foster creativity and imagination for an entire generation. Several cartoon entities are still going strong today, having expanded into comic books, collectibles, and live-action film franchises that have displayed much more staying power than their original half-hour Saturday morning animated episodes. The rise of cartoon and kids' cable channels. With TV cartoons becoming a booming business, limiting that business by only broadcasting during limited hours seemed counterproductive, and it was October 1st of 1992 that saw the US launch of the world's first dedicated animation station, the Cartoon Network. While TV stations specific to kids, toddlers, and teens weren't an exclusive concept, with the BBC Kids brand that would eventually launch out of the UK, Canada's YTV and Treehouse channels, and the Nickelodeon channel that had been around since 1979, the Cartoon Network was the first to dedicate its around-the-clock programming primarily to cartoons and animation. Filling the schedule with its ownership of the MGM and Hanna-Barbera libraries, classic shows like Tom and Jerry, Looney Tunes, and DC Comics superhero properties existed alongside the Cartoon Network's own original 1990s programming, including the Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Laboratory, and Johnny Bravo. With time marching onwards, soon the cartoon craze that was once confined to Saturday mornings and then expanded to 24-hour cable broadcasting would eventually find itself in a world of digital, wireless media that soon gave the world unlimited animation access at your fingertips. Are you new to Now and Then? Well, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. Each subscriber means a lot to us, and we appreciate every click. Now, more cartoon mayhem. Today's cartoon experience. Unlike a classic Roadrunner and Coyote gag where the Roadrunner is always just out of reach, almost all animated programming is now in easy reach thanks to technology. No longer stuck having to watch whatever video cassette or DVD happened to be on hand, or waiting for a specific time for your favorite show to come on TV, streaming has brought binge watchability and anytime, anyplace on-demand animation to tablets, laptops, and smartphones. And you don't even need to be at home in the living room in front of your TV. From Disney Plus to Netflix and every streamer in between, kid-specific sections offer plenty of animation for the little ones, as well as carrying plenty of cartoon chuckles for the adults. Hit shows of the new millennium like SpongeBob SquarePants and Peppa Pig, or gems of the 2010s like Adventure Time and Steven Universe, have found expanded audiences even bigger than their over-the-air heyday, thanks to new viewers finding their libraries through streaming. While the tech age has brought our viewing habits away from the living room and into a more intimate handheld experience, blossoming online communities and in-person fan conventions have also brought fandom from its 80s and 90s schoolyard sandbox origins into a more accessible sphere. But even before streaming was expanding the demographics of cartoon viewers, there were a few animation icons that had already proven cartoons weren't just for kids. Cartoons for grown-ups. Thanks to decades of syndication that saw the modern Stone Age family aired during lunchtime hours and sometimes after school or Saturday mornings, it's often forgotten that The Flintstones was the first animated show to be broadcast in primetime. The Family from Bedrock's first episode aired at 8:30 p.m. Eastern on September 30th, 1960. Successful enough to run for 6 seasons, the breakthrough was at least proof that cartoons could work during grown-up hours. Decades later, The Flintstones' legacy would be fulfilled, as primetime and late-night animation had very much become the norm. A generation that grew up with cartoons soon saw the genre growing up along with them, as cartoons found their way from Saturday mornings to primetime viewing slots on Sunday nights. Animated sitcom juggernauts like The Simpsons, Family Guy, and American Dad were primetime mainstays on Fox by the mid-2000s, and the Cartoon Network wasn't far behind on getting goofy with the grown-ups either. Its very first original program was a remix of the 1966 Hanna-Barbera Saturday morning classic, Space Ghost, that was retooled for the 90s as a late-night talk show entitled Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Debuting in 1994 and airing at 11 p.m. on Friday and Saturday nights, the quirky reimagining spawned other adult-themed remixes of Hanna-Barbera's Saturday morning favorites, including Birdman and the Galaxy Trio, redone as Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, and another Space Ghost spin-off called The Brack Show. The Cartoon Network officially launched its Adult Swim late-night block in September 2001, proving offbeat adult animated antics could compete with the classic cartoons on the network cable channels. Years later, streaming services did the same, with Netflix debuting runaway adult animated sitcom hits BoJack Horseman in 2014 and Big Mouth in 2017. Today, animated shows like Rick and Morty and South Park continue to prove that not all cartoons are just for kids. Technology and animation. When it comes to the animation we see on screen, it's evolved over the decades to match our tastes, and so have the techniques used to bring these images to life. The classic technique of animators hand-drawing a continuous series of slightly different scenes to create the illusion of moving action sequences is still very much the basis of the process, although the way those images are brought to life has changed over the decades. Since the mid-1990s, CGI has taken over the heavy lifting when it comes to creating 3D images and detailed motion capture effects. However, 2D animation still has its place in the cartoon world, although classic pencil and paint animation cells have given way to digital ink and paint methods. The Simpsons have used digital ink and paints as far back as their 14th season in 2003, after testing the technology for one episode each in the 10th and 12th seasons first. And watching television in the 80s and 90s was not a high-def experience like today, with picture tube CRT TVs and their glass screens as the industry standard. Heavy, bulky, and sometimes even wood-paneled rather than plastic-covered, the fuzzy standard def images of the time might as well be from the pre-electric age because they couldn't hold a candle to today's HD, 4K, and 8K wonders. Money and cartoon merchandising. With plenty of talk about the different devices we use to watch cartoons, it's easy to forget that as consumers, we often want more than just a half hour of entertainment from our favorite shows. As far back as the Flintstones in the 1960s, marketing products to go along with popular animated series has been a pop culture staple. Next to the typical stuff like coloring books, lunch boxes, and figurines, the Flintstones have had long-standing success over the decades with branded Flintstone vitamins, Flintstones Fruity Pebbles cereal, and even Flintstones Push-Ups frozen desserts. Even though later in the 80s and 90s, cartoons were often shamed for being one-dimensional as a way to sell products, it turned out to be a foolproof strategy. G.I. Joe's action figure line broke $150 million in sales in 1985 and boosted that number up to $160 million in 1986. After 3 seasons of the Saturday morning show, the affiliated toy line for He-Man and the Masters of the Universe had totaled more than $400 million in sales. After the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles' 1987 debut, they sold more than $1.1 billion worth of toys in the first 4 years of production. And even those programs that didn't sell toys saw merchandise explosions thanks to dedicated Saturday morning viewership and attached targeted advertising, with nearly every 80s or 90s animated property selling everything from sleeping bags and snowsuits to sippy cups and stuffed toys with a popular character's image printed somewhere on the product. Even cartoons that weren't just aimed at kids had big money drawing ability, with the animated cast of The Simpsons generating plenty of greenbacks. After debuting in 1989, the franchise was selling $750 million worth of various merchandise every year by 2008. In addition to the usuals like apparel and collectibles, there were backpacks, beanbags, and even Butterfinger bars which featured a Simpsons likeness of some kind over the years. Plenty of today's newer shows still market merchandise to kids, but what they can sell and how it's presented is under stricter watch. Cuddly characters no longer sell all those sugary cereals of the 1980s and 1990s to susceptible children. After years of backlash, the Kellogg Company was forced to pay out $20 million in damages from a 2019 class action lawsuit. Looks like the sweetest part of our cartoon watching experience is now left strictly to the content on the screen. From childhood chuckles to grown-up giggles, cartoons have come a long way. Today's streaming services have brought a convenience factor to animated programming, bringing the medium to a larger global audience than any couch potato kid from the 80s or 90s could have ever imagined. For a genre once used as cheap weekend filler material, often denounced as just for kids, there's plenty of proof that cartoons have staying power through the generations. Bugs Bunny's rabbit ears have already been around much longer than the era of rabbit ears on top of the TV, and whatever form animation takes in the future, it will keep us laughing all along the way. Got a Saturday morning cartoon favorite? We'd love to know. And stick around for another Now and Then video. Here's a couple of choices we think you might like.